The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 9. Civilization and Culture. We have first the distinction between civilization and barbarism. In its ordinary, popular sense, civilization means the state of civil society, governed, policed, organized, educated, possessed of knowledge and appliances, as opposed to that which has not or is not supposed to have these advantages. In a certain sense, the Red Indian, the Basuto, the Fiji Islander, had their civilization. They possessed a rigorously, if simply organized society, a social law, some ethical ideas, a religion, a kind of training, a good many virtues, in some of which it is said civilization is sadly lacking. But we are agreed to call them savages and barbarians, mainly, it seems, because of their crude and limited knowledge, the primitive rudeness of their appliances, and the bare simplicity of their social organization. In the more developed states of society, we have such epithets as semi-civilized and semi-barbarous, which are applied by different types of civilization to each other. The one which is for a time dominant and physically successful has naturally the loudest and most self-confident say in the matter. Formerly, men were more straightforward and simple-minded, and frankly expressed their standpoint by stigmatizing all peoples different in a general culture from themselves as barbarians or malechos. The word civilization, so used, comes to have a merely relative significance, or hardly any fixed sense at all. We must therefore get rid in it of all that is temporary or accidental, and fix it upon this distinction that barbarism is the state of society in which man is almost entirely preoccupied with his life and body, his economic and physical existence, at first with their sufficient maintenance, not as yet their greater or richer well-being, and has few means and little inclination to develop his mentality, while civilization is the more evolved state of society in which to a sufficient social and economic organization is added the activity of the mental life in most, if not all, of its parts. For sometimes some of these parts are left aside, or discouraged, or temporarily atrophied by their inactivity. Yet the society may be very obviously civilized, and even highly civilized. This conception will bring in all the civilizations, historic and prehistoric, and put aside all the barbarism, whether of Africa or Europe or Asia, Hun or Goth or Vandal or Turkoman. It is obvious that in a state of barbarism, the rude beginnings of civilization may exist. It is obvious, too, that in a civilized society, A great mass of barbarism, or numerous relics of it, may exist. In that sense, all societies are semi-civilized. How much of our present-day civilization will be looked back upon with wonder and disgust by a more developed humanity, as the superstitions and atrocities of an imperfectly civilized era? But the main point is this, that in any society which we can call civilized, the mentality of man must be active, the mental pursuits developed, and the regulation and improvement of his life by the mental being, a clearly self-conscious concept in his better mind. But in a civilized society, there is still the distinction between the partially, crudely, conventionally civilized, and the cultured. It would seem, therefore, that the mere participation in the ordinary benefits of civilization is not enough to raise a man into the mental life proper. A farther development, a higher elevation is needed. The last generation drew emphatically the distinction between the cultured man and the Philistine, and got a fairly clear idea of what was meant by it. Roughly, the Philistine was for them the man who lives outwardly the civilized life, possesses all its paraphernalia, and has and mouths the current stock of opinions, prejudices, conventions, sentiments, but is impervious to ideas, exercises no free intelligence, is innocent of beauty and art, vulgarizes everything that he touches, religion, ethics, literature, life. The Philistine is, in fact, the modern, civilized barbarian. He is often the half-civilized physical and vital barbarian by his unintelligent attachment to the life of the body, the life of the vital needs and impulses, and the ideal of the merely domestic and economic human animal. But essentially and commonly, he is the mental barbarian, the average sensational man. That is to say, his mental life is that of the lower substratum of the mind, the life of the senses, the life of the sensations, the life of the emotions, the life of practical conduct, the very first status of the mental being. In all these he may be very active, very vigorous, but he does not govern them by a higher light, or seek to uplift them to a freer and nobler eminence. Rather, he pulls the higher faculties down to the level of his senses, his sensations, his unenlightened and unchastened emotions, his gross utilitarian practicality. His aesthetic side is a little developed. Either he cares nothing for beauty, or has the crudest aesthetic tastes, which help to lower and vulgarize the general standard of aesthetic creation and the aesthetic sense. He is often strong about morals, far more particular, usually about moral conduct, than the man of culture. But his moral being is as crude and undeveloped as the rest of him. It is conventional, unchastened, unintelligent, a mass of likes and dislikes, prejudices and current opinions, attachment to social conventions and respectabilities, and an obscure dislike, rooted in the mind of sensations and not in the intelligence, of any open defiance or departure from the generally accepted standard of conduct. His ethical bent is a habit of the sense mind. It is the morality of the average sensational man. He has a reason and the appearance of an intelligent will, but they are not his own. They are part of the group mind, received from his environment, or so far as they are his own, merely a practical, sensational, emotional reason and will, a mechanical repetition of habitual notions and rules of conduct, not a play of real thought and intelligent determination. His use of them no more makes him a developed mental being than the daily movement to and from his place of business makes the average Londoner a developed physical being, or his quotidian contributions to the economic life of the country make the bank clerk a developed economic man. He is not mentally active, but mentally reactive, a very different matter. The Philistine is not dead. Quite the contrary. He abounds, but he no longer reigns. The sons of culture have not exactly conquered, but they have got rid of the old Goliath and replaced him by a new giant. This is the sensational man, who has got awakened to the necessity of at least some intelligent use of the higher faculties, and is trying to be mentally active. He has been whipped and censured and educated into that activity, and he lives beside in a maelstrom of new information, new intellectual fashions, new ideas, and new movements, to which he can no longer be obstinately impervious. He is open to new ideas. He can catch at them and hurl them about in a rather confused fashion. He can understand or misunderstand ideals, organize to get them carried out, and even, it would appear, fight and die for them. He knows he has to think about ethical problems, social problems, problems of science and religion, to welcome new political developments, to look with as understanding an eye as he can attain to, at all the new movements of thought and inquiry and action that chase each other across the modern field, or clash upon it. He is a reader of poetry, as well as a devourer of fiction and periodical literature. You will find in him, perhaps, a student of Tagore, or an admirer of Whitman. He has perhaps no very clear ideas about beauty and aesthetics, but he has heard that art is a not altogether unimportant part of life. The shadow of this new Colossus is everywhere. He is the great reading public. The newspapers and weekly and monthly reviews are his. Fiction and poetry and art are his mental caterers. The theater and the cinema and the radio exist for him. Science hastens to bring her knowledge and discoveries to his doors, and equip his life with endless machinery. Politics are shaped in his image. It is he who opposed and then brought about the enfranchisement of women, who has been evolving syndicalism, anarchism, the war of classes, the uprising of labor, waging what we are told are wars of ideas or of cultures, a ferocious type of conflict made in the very image of this new barbarism, or bringing about, in a few days, Russian revolutions which the century-long efforts and sufferings of the intelligentsia failed to achieve. It is his coming which has been the precipitative agent for the reshaping of the modern world. If a Lenin, a Mussolini, a Hitler have achieved their rapid and almost stupefying success, it was because this driving force, this responsive, quick-acting mass, was there to carry them to victory. A force lacking to their less fortunate predecessors. The first results of this momentous change have been inspiriting to our desire of movement, but a little disconcerting to the thinker and to the lover of a high and fine culture. For if it has to some extent democratized culture, or the semblance of culture, it does not seem at first sight to have elevated or strengthened it by this large accession of the half-redeemed from below. Nor does the world seem to be guided any more directly by the reason and intelligent will of her best minds than before. Commercialism is still the heart of modern civilization. A sensational activism is still its driving force. Modern education has not, in the mass, redeemed the sensational man. It has only made necessary to him things to which he was not formerly accustomed: mental activity and occupations, intellectual and even aesthetic sensations, emotions of idealism. He still lives in the vital substratum, but he wants it stimulated from above. He requires an army of writers to keep him mentally occupied and provide some sort of intellectual pabulum for him. He has a thirst for general information of all kinds, which he does not care or has not time to coordinate or assimilate, for popularized scientific knowledge, for such new ideas as he can catch, provided they are put before him with force or brilliance, for mental sensations and excitation of many kinds, for ideals which he likes to think of as actuating his conduct, and which do give it sometimes a certain color. It is still the activism and sensationalism of the crude mental being, but much more open and free, and the cultured, the intelligentsia, find that they can get a hearing from him such as they never had from the pure Philistine, provided they can first stimulate or amuse him. Their ideas have now a chance of getting executed, such as they never had before. The result has been to cheapen thought and art and literature, to make talent and even genius run in the grooves of popular success, to put the writer and thinker and scientist very much in a position like that of the cultured Greek slave in a Roman household, where he has to work for, please, amuse, and instruct his master, while keeping a careful eye on his tastes and preferences, and repeating trickily the manner and the points that have caught his fancy. The higher mental life, in a word, has been democratized, sensationalized, activized with both good and bad results. Through it all, the eye of faith can see perhaps that a yet crude but an enormous change has begun. Thought and knowledge, if not yet beauty, can get a hearing and even produce rapidly some large, vague, yet in the end effective will for their results. The mass of culture and of men who think and strive seriously to appreciate and to know has enormously increased behind all this surface veil of sensationalism. And even the sensational man has begun to undergo a process of transformation. Especially new methods of education, new principles of society are beginning to come into the range of practical possibility, which will create perhaps one day that as yet unknown phenomenon, a race of men, not only a class, who have to some extent found and developed their mental selves, a cultured humanity.